Astro Psych 400, podcast for sleep. It's time to go to sleep now. Time to surround yourself with positive vibes. You are who you are. Being weird is not a crime. Is it important to think about world peace? That is the question that we are going to explore. Some people think that peace is impossible, that this concept of removing conflict from the external world and from the mind itself is never going to happen, and it is just an ideal that is silly and made up, and it's not what we are meant to achieve. And those people like to think more about conflict resolution. But if it is an ideal, is it important to think about it? Yertolevs was behind the movement for World Peace 2035, and the first step in this plan was to get people to start talking more about the concept of world peace. We live in a world that definitely favors violence and brutality and arguments and conflict and acting on one's urges. You can even see this if you watch cable news and people get into a debate and start shouting, and people say that it's television gold. When Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars, Chris Rock said, "Greatest night in the history of television," because people enjoy conflict. But there's a reason why some people say that temptation can often lead to bad behavior, or that giving in to temptation is not a good thing. For starters, it shows a lack of emotional awareness. Secondarily, it shows a lack of control. And so many people who are trying to encourage a more peaceful world are simply trying to say that we need to be in control of everything. Be in control of your own body. Be in control of your own mind. And absolutely not talking about the law, but just about the way you feel. Just about the way that you're thinking. About when someone says a comment that you do not like, not getting angry, or even if you do get angry, not wanting to punch the other person in the face. And that is another step toward the concept of world peace, recognizing that acting on emotion can lead to very destructive consequences. Perhaps it was in the year 79 BCE when Virgil said, "Anger carries the mind away," and it leads to a lack of mental awareness. And that is something else that is also heavily neglected in the discussions about world peace and social and emotional learning, as well as psychology and counseling and high school health classes. Differentiating between mental illness and mental awareness. Mental awareness about being aware of your own emotions, being aware of your own mind, how to deal with problems such as being angry and frustrated and sad, as opposed to actually experiencing something such as clinical depression. Well, what does somebody do when they're just having a bad day and they get overwhelmed with negative feelings? How do you respond to that? And mental awareness education is very valuable, but it stems from the root of people choosing to act on urges and giving in to sometimes the destructive temptations. And let's be very clear, temptation can be destructive. Not all temptations are soothing and relaxing and enjoyable for the present. Some people are tempted to do destructive actions because they want to retaliate on an angry feeling that they're having at the present. But that's all it is, a feeling. And when I had the greatest moments of mental clarity in my life, I was 26 years old, and I had been reading a lot about world peace, and I decided that I was going to not convert to the Jain religion from India, one of the Dharmic spiritualities, but I was simply just reading about it and wanting to know more. And I really began to just tell myself, are my decisions going to lead to peace, or are they going to lead to acts of unwarranted destruction, even trying to eliminate any form of conventionally mean and unpleasant imagery and ideas from my life. If I thought that somebody was saying something mean in a song lyric, I wouldn't say it, and I was only going to learn the parts of the song that did not have those mean and cruel parts of the lyrics. And I achieved perhaps my greatest moments of mental clarity, and that was 8 years ago. And the only thing that has changed is that I've given in to more temptations for the sake of being social with other people. When you're choosing to live a life where you're saying, I'm going to eliminate all aspects of unwarranted destruction from my presence, then you're going to experience a lot of pushback from other people, because the fact of the matter is, even if you believe something to be true, not everyone else is going to go along with what you believe, and other people are even going to perceive that it is an insult, thinking that they have something wrong with them if you say that you're not going to participate in certain activities because you think they will lead to unwarranted destruction. They do not always take kindly to that, and they often perceive it as a form of holier-than-thou behavior. There are many examples of this. Psych2Go even did a presentation on how people who are conventionally nice are often not liked because other people feel that they have to watch their behavior. They never know what is acceptable to say around them. They always think the other person is going to judge them. But at the same time, we should not reject nice behavior, because I believe that Keanu Reeves, the actor, said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I don't want to live in a world where being nice is viewed as a weakness. And we can do both. We can have nice behavior, and we can care about other people, and we can interact with other people. And some people simply decide that they're going to check out of the social circles altogether, and that's their plan for world peace. Those are the reasons why people go into the monasteries. Those are the reasons why people choose to spend their lives meditating all day long, and they just want to spend 8 hours with their eyes closed, focusing on consciousness itself, because they do not see a reason to live in a world of chaos, destruction, and temptation that leads to further chaotic and destructive actions. So there's a certain justification for going to the monastery, but there's also a certain responsibility that us human beings have to help other people. When I was in my early 20s, I often felt confused about why people would choose a life in the monastery, thinking they're only doing things that are going to help themselves and this very small community that is in the monastery, saying that they're just going to live isolated from the rest of society. But how on earth does that help the populations and the masses and the people who are in extreme poverty? But by the time I got to my mid-20s, I found that almost any time one tries to interact with a system, the possibility of chaos and destruction and just downright unpleasantness is very, very real. And I believe that certain people come to a certain realization that every action they do is going to bring about some type of problem. And the only way to avoid those types of problems is to go to a place like the monastery. And as far as the concept of world peace goes, I definitely do believe it is also in the mind, the removal of unwarranted destruction in both the mind and the external world. And if you remove unwarranted destruction, then all destruction can be removed. Therefore, there is a pathway that we can formulate. And I think that's what your Olaf was talking about when he said that we just need to get people talking, share their ideas about world peace. And the whole point is that the harmonious society, the society that is free from conflict, is not peaceful, because it doesn't eliminate the suffering that certain people might experience if they are forced to think and behave in a certain way. Tyranny can still exist in the harmonious society. Authoritarian societies can be harmonious, but there can still be the oppression of people. Back in 2018, I began to think a lot about how we could actually achieve some type of system that would bring us closer to world peace. And the one that I thought of was subsistence gardening, thinking that if we just had one man and one woman living on 1 acre plots and they would not interact with each other, perhaps they could build certain walls around all of these 1 acre plots and that they would just coexist, male and female, together, or maybe even some people would choose to live in a solitary way if they could tolerate that for long enough. And then they would use the 1 acre plot to completely support their own food resources, subsistence gardening as opposed to mass subsistence farming. But a true condition of that would be that there would have to be almost an understanding that procreation would not take place because man and woman would be able to coexist together for company. However, if they were unable to procreate, then there wouldn't be any new offspring to take over the land and have necessity to have now 3 people and then 4 people and 5 people. You would eliminate the land's need for food production. The land would not be overused, and it would be much more difficult to support 5 people on a 1 acre plot than 2 people. And eventually the man and the woman would die, and they would be becoming one with the earth once again. Their remains would become absorbed by the natural entities that were on this 1 acre plot. And if no human beings were around to experience consciousness, then it would be completely restored to nature. And it's almost like coming full circle, almost like a recreation of the Garden of Eden, because even though that is a biblical story, it talks about one man and one woman who are sharing a garden, and then one man and one woman coming full circle and returning Earth to a pure state of consciousness. But that is, of course, something that would not be able to achieve, to have the entire world agree to share 1 acre plots of land without anything other than some type of barrier that is keeping them away, and people just accepting when they ran out of resources that it was their time to die. The problem with that is that's governing a society based purely on a principle of moral understanding, and that is not an easy thing to do because it makes the assumption that it is possible for everybody to be thinking in the same way all the time, to honor the same belief system all the time, to honor the same principles all the time, to honor the same virtues all the time, and it's just not something that we can do in our present state. And the people who actually endorse those types of thinking and make it their life's mission to promote this type of world where we do not have a government controlling the society and we all secede from society and we just have this universal understanding that these 2 people are going to coexist on this piece of land and these 2 people are going to coexist on that piece of land. They have a very difficult time presenting it in the present day, and they say very clearly that it is going to be a multi-generational effort to try and get a moral understanding available to everyone, or to recognize it as a universal concept. And that goes right back to idealism, because it's something that seems impossible. But I was talking about this time from 2014 when I was 26 years old and reading a lot about world peace and Jainism and on the notion of possible versus impossible. One thing I encountered in my readings was when someone said very clearly that striving toward the ideal may seem like it is impossible, but you have to try. Otherwise, you are not trying. And there actually is this definition of goodness in the world. And there's this definition of goodness within our existence. When I say the world, people are probably thinking about Earth as like that blue and green marble going around the sun. But if you just think about the world as the universe itself and consciousness, and the fact that existence and consciousness are always present, if we think about that world, then there is this definition of goodness that I believe is very real, and that there is a good way to live, and when we strive toward that way to live, removing unwarranted destruction from our life, as well as trying to just remove conflict from both the external world but also the mind itself, then we have the ability to keep trying and believing and practicing and living our lives to get as close to that ideal as possible. And it's just that it might seem like it is impossible, but we have to try. Otherwise, we are simply not trying. Now, in Eastern spirituality, there is the concept of the Brahman or the Supreme Reality, which has several different interpretations. And some people think of it as existence, consciousness, and bliss, and that they even want to put their mind in touch with that. However, Carl Jung, the psychologist and doctor from Switzerland, was addressed about this, and he was asked the direct question, what do you think about that, putting your mind in touch with some type of greater form of consciousness, or if there is some type of Brahman, Godhead, Spirit, putting your mind in touch with that, then what is your take on that subject? And his response was very simple. It is hardly possible. There would be some type of interference. And at first I really viewed that as a very strong piece of contradiction to all the types of reading that I had done about world peace in the past, because I was thinking that maybe this is something that is impossible, that we aren't meant to strive toward. However, there is also the same principle that we've laid out before. You have to strive toward the ideal, because even if it seems like it is impossible, you still have to continue to try. Overall, though, I find that the absolute biggest battle for people is just people themselves, human behavior. And if we're going to talk about existence, consciousness, and bliss, there's another three-part force out there called the id, the ego, and the superego. And I heard something rather interesting, well, actually several pieces of information over the past couple of years. The first is that the concept of Lucifer is nothing more than the human ego. When people talk about Luciferians, some people think that they are just worshiping the human ego. And the thing that I heard just a couple months ago was that some people say your ego or my ego. No, it's not yours or mine. There is no ownership of the ego. There is just the ego. There is only one for everyone. And it's giving in to that type of Luciferian temptation when people do things to fuel their own state of mind in a destructive way and showing disregard for other people. And this brings us to perhaps one of the most important components about world peace, and that is getting other human beings to simply just love each other, to simply just honor and appreciate and acknowledge and respect humanity, because there is not a lot of that going on. And that's another reason why they try to tie Luciferian thinking to the ego, because many people who are involved with satanic practices simply say that they do not believe or worship any type of devil or any type of red being that has bull horns and a pitchfork. They're talking about how they want to give in to human nature. Their satanic idea is just human nature. The beast is man itself, and it perhaps worshiping the ego as opposed to your ego or my ego. But there's this very big desire to do that because it goes back to the exact basic components of human nature and moving into a civilized society. Because there was this very big hypothesis out there for a long time in the archaeological world that warfare created civilization. Because, say for example, if we start growing a crop like grain or maize or perhaps something like oats, and now you have food and you keep your food in a storehouse, as soon as you have something, other people will try to take it from you because your tribe has food and the other tribe doesn't have food. Then they're going to attack you. They're going to try to steal the food in your storehouse because they want to live, or they just want to alleviate the pain and suffering that comes from hunger, or they don't have any other means to obtain food, and this seems like the last resort, and that one tribe would conquer another tribe. So some people would think that warfare created civilization because if I take your tribe and put my tribe together, if we have the same amount of people involved, now we're twice as big, and the outsiders who are disorganized, unorganized, will have a much more difficult time fighting against us. If I put my food and your food together, and your soldiers and my soldiers, even if we're just dealing with people who are carrying sticks and rocks and maybe throwing blunt objects, if we just put all of those people together, then it will be twice as easy for us to defend ourselves. The hypothesis that warfare created civilization, but there was somewhat of a reversal in the archaeological community about this type of thinking because the evidence began to show that it was not warfare that created civilization. It was trade. And I'm citing the archaeological finds from the lost pyramids of Corral, where it shows that it's not my tribe and your tribe together, we have twice as many ways to defend ourselves. No, it is that if I put my things with your things together, we will have twice as many items to trade. How beautiful is that? The collective cooperation of humanity is what drives civilization forward. And it's a brilliant way of thinking. But there are even archaeological finds that have been found in Turkey at Göbekli Tepe that suggest that believing and practice and worship and developing the altar, that all took place before the dawn of agriculture, and that rituals were so important to people that just believing in some type of greater definition of goodness was so much more valuable than food itself, or that honoring some type of bond between your tribe and my tribe. How about honoring the bond between the human brain and the spirit? And this goes back perhaps even 12,000, 13,000, 14,000 years. And people do have an understanding and respect and acknowledgement for some type of greater definition of goodness in the world. And it becomes quite difficult for some people to comprehend because they can't see it, and they become obsessed with this type of materialism. And on the notion of world peace, is it actually a good thing or not? When I began to talk to somebody back when I was perhaps 18 or 19 years old, I was in college, and we were sitting in a McDonald's together, and I was just asking this person who said that she didn't believe anything, and I was talking about, like, well, what about, morality and ethics, and what about some type of principle of love? And she simply said, I can't believe in something that I don't see. And then I just began to not say the words, but feel them. Well, do you not believe in hope? Do you not believe in love? Do you not believe in striving? I mean, how on earth could you ever see hope? How on earth could you ever see love? And do you even see your own experiences, or do you just remember them? So I think there are all types of concepts that we experience that we do not see ourselves, and perhaps the ideal is one of the most important one, if not the most important, in actually recognizing that there could be a definition of goodness that we are meant to strive for, and this definition of goodness leads to absolute peace on earth. And peace on earth is going to mean different things to different people, no matter which way we choose to present it. But what I think is most important is to recognize the collective cooperation of humanity, the respect and acknowledgement of not only humanity, but also other living things, plants, animals, life forms, and just loving the earth, recognizing that the earth is something that we can love, recognizing that when you look at a photo of a pelican flying by the beach, there is something marvelous and wonderful about that. When you look at the stars in the sky, or maybe the photo of the Hubble Deep Field with all those galaxies, that there is something amazing about our existence and the cosmos and the universe and the world that we live in that can be appreciated, and that destroying something is perhaps completely immoral, or destroying something for an unwarranted reason, that is. I once heard a kindergarten teacher tell her student that you shouldn't crumple up your paper because it's not beautiful anymore. And I think that there is a certain way to convey the messages to other people. There was a rather interesting book that was written several years ago by Dr. Michael Shermer called The Science of Good and Evil. I say that it is interesting, but I certainly don't agree with it. When he talked about how the collective happiness of a society is what drives it forward. And I absolutely disagree with this type of thinking, because if you have 100 people in the tribe and 99 of them want to kill person X, then if they say that they're going to be happier by killing person X to execute this person who hasn't done anything wrong, they just view them as someone who is unwanted and undesirable, then that would improve the collective happiness of those 99 people. And then once person X was eliminated, then they would be even happier. They might even celebrate and rejoice. But that doesn't mean that person X deserves to die. People conflate world peace with happiness all the time, and I think so many of us imagine that. But I hope you are well asleep now. However, I really want to ask you the question about what do you think world peace should look like? And when I was younger, I definitely couldn't imagine any type of collective happiness of society. But to be honest, when I would think about world peace, the way that I would imagine it would be a woman and a child by the riverside, and there would be this waterfall, and there would just be these green open pastures all around them. But the most interesting thing was I absolutely did not hear the human voice, and I think that that shows that it is more about honoring the existence of humanity, but recognizing that human interaction can lead to certain destructive behaviors, and that all stems from the lack of mental awareness. It stems from the lack of appreciation of humanity, desiring happiness instead of world peace itself. Let's differentiate between peace and happiness. World peace is the removal of unwarranted destruction in both the mind and the external world for everyone. In thus doing so, it's going to become the removal of destruction in the mind and the external world, period. And humans can respect and acknowledge the earth. And perhaps on the podcast for sleep, I've talked about the difference between respect and acknowledgement. And I think that is because that the most important thing we need to do is, even if you disagree with the way that someone is living, if it is not bringing physical or emotional harm to somebody else, then you can acknowledge their right to freedom, acknowledge that they have the ability, the justification, and perhaps the moral opportunity to think and behave in a way that is different of yours if it is non-destructive. And I think that respect means that there is a certain acceptance of it in the heart and in the mind, but acknowledgement does not require that type of justification. So to answer the question, should we start talking more about world peace? Absolutely, but I think that even before we just spread these ideas of world peace, we need to recognize that other people are not going to be warm and welcoming and receptive of it. They are simply going to try and fight back because it fuels the ego, because it gives in to temptation. They seek momentary domination. They want to act on their biological urges. They do not want the collective cooperation of humanity. They want momentary domination. And some decisions are better handled with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. And people can be precise in their language. People can often Lead with the olive branch instead of the sword. How about a wonderful world peace metaphor? And it is through that, through achieving moral understanding and a collective understanding of these principles, it can bring a certain degree of change, and multi-generational efforts would take place. But it is going to be an uphill battle, and it may seem impossible. And the final note that I will leave you with is that even if somebody has an ideal that they're striving toward, or even if there is an ideal for everyone in which we are striving toward, it is almost certainly not going to be a governmental law, because we live in a world where the ideals and the beliefs of people are not governmental decisions. We do not pass a constitutional amendment that is going to say you have to be nice to everyone, or you have to cooperate with everyone, you have to share with everyone. World peace is going to be achieved through an understanding of humanity, and an understanding and appreciation and acknowledgement and respect of humanity, and respecting the earth, and respecting wildlife, and respecting the stars and the sky, and respecting our ability to be aware of our own conscious experience of existence. If you get people to think in a different way, it is more valuable. That is all for me now. I hope you are fast asleep. I hope you will wake up in the morning rejuvenated. You are who you are. Being weird is not a crime. Good night.